1969 wasn't over yet for Pink Floyd. They had one more project to undertake, something that was meant to be a little bit more experimental. They were going to release a mammoth double album. This is not going to be a double album of new material such as The Wall, which would be released about 10 years, if not a little bit more later. Instead, it was going to be a live album on one side with a studio record on the second half. And for the studio record, instead of opting to write as a collective whole, they instead branched off and wrote individually. The result is a very, very interesting album entitled UMMAGUMMA. A double disc that has a very nice live album on side A and B if you've got the vinyl, or in this case disc number 1 for those of you who are collecting this now on CD, with a very odd studio album on side B, or disc 2, whatever you want to call it. The live spectacle of Pink Floyd being on a CD only fulfills half of the real experience, the other half being the visual arc that really comes with a Pink Floyd performance that really just kind of takes on a life of its own. This is psychedelic music after all, and this is a time frame in which psychedelic drugs, as well as anything else that's drug related or alcohol related or fun related or just mind expandingly related, happened, usually at these shows, if not at other shows or just in casual everyday life. Don't you just wish that you could just drive down the street and smoke a joint? Used to be what happened. In fact, if you check out Dave Mustaine's biography, which I've been reading, there were times whenever you could just drink a handle of whiskey on the highway, and as long as you didn't get caught, you were A-okay. It was a very liberating time. It was a very strange time, but a liberating time. And it's something that would go on for about another decade or so before the war on drugs started to happen. However, with that digression aside, the live experience that's captured on this disc is extremely, extremely worth it. It's almost worth the disc, or the whole entire price of the album itself, because you're hearing these older era Pink Floyd songs done in a live environment and done very exquisitely. All the elements of psychedelia are still there, and even though Syd Barrett is not present, those songs in which he was responsible for, well, they're represented very well here as well. But that's not what we're here to talk about for the most part. We're more here to talk about the live album, or the studio album, the studio side. Yeah, live album, I just talked about it. UMMAGUMMA's studio album and the following album, Atom Heart Mother, were both experimentations that kind of took on a life of their own. And they were experimentations where the band had no clear-cut idea what they were doing. And that's something that they have openly admitted in conversations, interviews, and other published media over the past 30 years. These are albums dually that just seem like what the fuck moments in the band's career. I'll get to Atom Heart Mother whenever we tackle that album next. But here on UMMAGUMMA, something just seemed out of place. There seemed to be no focus whatsoever, and that's because that was kind of the point. It was meant to be a disjointed experiment, where each individual member of the band was able to write their own song, which would appear on the studio side of this disc. And the result was kind of interesting. We would have one song that's broken down into 3 parts that's mainly just drums, which, gee, I wonder who wrote that. The folkier songs that were penned by your Gilmores and your Waters. And then Sisyphus. Sisyphus is kind of just an odd amalgamation that seems like it would be probably one of the straightest and best songs on this release, but in reality just kind of lingers there and sticks around and doesn't really go away whenever it should have. You have random noises full of psychedelia, a lot of atmosphere. On a couple of tracks we have, pet noises or animal noises. Obviously, just considering some of the titles on this record, it's just absolutely redonkulous. And there just seems to be no cohesiveness to this. Now, the psychedelic movement was one all about experimentation, all about atmosphere, and really just being very disjointed, considering a lot of these constructions were made while the artists themselves were completely and totally zoned out. The first 2 Pink Floyd albums were a perfect example of what happens whenever a guy like Syd Barrett is kind of lingering on his own planet in his own solar system in his head and concocts musical ideas. It's considered classic to some, but to others, and especially by those that are Pink Floyd traditionalists that love the 70s and later albums, they really just seem to be missing something, and that's probably a real solidarity to them. This is an album, though, where even though Syd had long been gone, the solidarity just seems absent. This is one of those albums that the band themselves even called them complete shit. And it's something I'd have to mention twice because it's just something that's so strange to me. these are achievements that are supposed to be, it's supposed to make you feel good about yourself. You put out a record, you release something to the public that they enjoyed. This is a record that's gone platinum. It's one that did very well. It was actually #1 over in Britain. However, whenever it's listened to again, nobody really knew what they were doing. And this was an experiment that, well, maybe fulfilled its course and kind of, paid it the pauper in leads later on in their career. But at this particular point in their career, whenever this was released, and especially after Atom Heart Mother was released, the band themselves and a lot of other people were probably thinking, what exactly is this band doing? Is this band going to doom themselves to obscurity by trying to undertake these experiments and really prove just how valuable Sid was to the band? Is this going to be kind of Pink Floyd's legacy? Is this what we're going to be expecting from this point forward? Because with the psychedelic movement kind of drawing to a close by the middle part of the 1970s, well, then what would they have after that? What would there be for them to do? Would they try to continue on this movement, or... There's a lot of questions, not enough answers. This is an album that, for the live side, is certainly worth the purchase. However, for the studio side, it's an interesting thing to listen to maybe once or twice, but this won't be something that a lot of people will want to revisit. It's going to be a very difficult, paralleling listen, something that really is going to require enough of a mental distraction aside from the music in order to kind of make it through. Drugs usually would work. I found out that whenever I listened to this for about the 14th time, that reading worked pretty well. But even then, it just seemed like not even background noise. It just seemed as though I would, decide to read outside in New York City, and I'm just hearing the random sounds of, somebody's life or somebody's mind, as opposed to hearing the sounds of a busy, metropolis. So even that metaphor doesn't work. No metaphor really works for this album. It's a very strange phenomenon, and it's something that I don't quite understand. However, that's what also intrigues me to it. It's the reason why I keep going to UMMAGUMMA sometimes, to see if maybe that next listen will be the one where it kind of reveals itself to me. I don't think it ever will, but for some strange reason I keep tricking my mind into believing that it will. Overall, this is probably the weakest thus far out of our Pink Floyd journey. Something that just seems incredibly and terribly distant from that which they have accomplished up until this point. It's an album that will long be considered forgotten, and for many fans that are casual fans and not obsessed, they probably won't even be able to list this whenever they're listening to studio albums. They'll probably go directly from Saucer Full of Secrets, jump over more UMMAGUMMA and Atom Heart Mother, and go right to metal. And that's if they even include those early albums at all. Maybe they'll start with metal. Maybe they won't even start with metal. Maybe they'll just start with Dark Side of the Moon. It's hard to tell. Point is that this was an important piece of their journey, because they are getting these experimentations out of the way. But at this point in time, at this point in history, at this point in Pink Floyd's history, nobody had any clue of what was to come. Not even the band themselves.